those people that if they couldn't afford a dentist, you know that they're not buying toothpaste, toothbrushes, floss, and doing any of that kind of stuff.
Thank you.
the budget, a special meeting of the Board of Ed at 7:02. If we could stand and pledge the flag, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And I will ask this to remain standing, and I will turn it over to Mr. Stanek.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I may, I would like to President Biden in remembering the 406,000 plus victims of the COVID-19 virus who have died in the United States. Thank you.
Okay. All right. The budget presentation is first on the agenda. So, Michael, do you want to start first?
Certainly. Good evening, everyone. As typical when we do our budget workshop, a lot of what we talk about and share will be shared by our business manager, Mrs. Holmes. You know, what I'd like to point out to the board, and I'd like to thank all of the hard work of our team of administrators and all of our department heads to really come and present a fiscally responsible requests to both Vonda, myself, and to Sherry, and also to be part of the team in terms of collaborative effort, looking at the needs of the district as a whole and what is really going to assist in moving our district forward and meeting the needs of our students. So that's why what we tried to do this year was to give you kind of a Cliff Notes page. And in those first 3 pages of the document, you'll see that it's a Cliff Notes page, which outlines the process that we undertook and that we often undertake when it comes to budget. But we also, in that, shared with you all of the requests, because we've been asked in the last several years to say, hey, can we really see what's kind of been asked for and then what kind of made the list, if you will. So what we did was we've taken that feedback over the last couple of years, and that's exactly what we did. So those budget Cliff Notes page are just that. You'll see that all of the requests that came in, and then you'll see in the next couple of pages, things that made the cut, if you will, from that list. And it made the cut for a couple of reasons. In that, conversations with our team of administrators, conversations amongst myself and Mrs. Tenza and Mrs. Holmes, and then really what we can faithfully promote to move the district forward. And those items on there that represent that budgetary increase are those items that we feel can do all of those things. So when you're really looking at the budget from a purely numbers standpoint, and as everyone on this call knows, I mean, I'm a numbers guy, but from a purely numbers standpoint, the number doesn't tell the story. The number in and of itself, shares part of it in terms of our increase. And we also understand that that number plays a part in the town when obviously after the board accepts the budget and moves forward to the Board of Finance, but really what it means for the needs of our students. And our administrators have also joined this call. So when Sherry kind of takes you through some of the items that made the list from the budget Cliff Notes, that if there's any further detail needed, Vonda, myself, Sherry, or any one of the administrators can definitely answer those questions as well. So we wanted tonight to once again be a collaborative experience as it has been when it comes to the budget, but we wanted to kind of let you in on the behind the scenes in terms of the Cliff Notes page. I hope that that's able to do that for you. So if, Sherry, if you want to start with the Cliff Notes and what made the cut.
Sure. I'm going to focus on the second page of the Cliff Notes, if you would. Our central office team, as Mr. Wilson mentioned, met carefully and reviewed all the requests that were made and added in what we felt was needed to move the district forward and to meet the needs of all of our learners. While doing this, we also reached back out to some administrators so that we could confirm the non-filling of certain staff positions. Subsequently, on Tuesday, January 5th, 2021, we found out from our insurance brokers of the new numbers to place in. On Tuesday, Lockton Group felt that we could renew the insurance rates at 9.5% as opposed to the original number of 13% that we were provided. This being the case, I reran the budget with this number as well as with the following items that we kept on the list. Those can be viewed here. We have retirements for 21-22 school year. Mr. DeMarco, Ms. Alcott, and Ms. Roach, 2 social study teachers in the French, are not being filled. The building administrators have decided to not fill the above positions for the 21-22 school year, thus creating a savings for next year. The need for these positions will constantly and continually be evaluated by our building administrators and central office to determine whether or not they are filled for the 22-23 school year. The insurance rates, as I mentioned, we increased to 9.5%. This increase yielded an overall 9.9% increase over last year. It was 8% overall, and then with the added new positions and benefits that we had to secure, it brought it up to 9.9%. After careful review by the central office team, here are the items that made it into the 21-22 superintendent recommended budget and is included as follows. 1, special education teacher plus 3 instructional paraprofessionals for Seymour High School. Over the past several academic years, we have worked to expand our ABA programming from the elementary school into the middle school. 2 students who have been participating in this program will be transitioning into the high school in the fall of 2021. These students will require continued ABA programming. 2, 4 permanent building subs with benefits. These are the 4 positions that we were able to fund from grant money this year. However, we feel that the need to have permanent subs in our buildings is critical to establish consistency in our schools when teachers are out. However, at SHS, this position will be split into a 0.4 ELA teacher to meet the needs of our students for our English course offerings and a 0.6 permanent building substitute to cover classes when teachers are absent. We decided to put in an increase in music at the high school from 0.4 to a full-time position. This will allow Seymour High School administration to still offer music classes while allowing for dual certified staff to teach other content areas. 1 nurse floater plus benefits. This position is needed to help whenever one of our nurses is out. When all are in, this person will rotate between buildings to assist the school nurse with the day-to-day operations. 1 library media position split between the high school and the middle school with benefits. This position was requested last year and did not make it into the budget due to fiscal constraints. This position is needed to deliver newly developed curriculum in this area. It is also needed to bring our media centers back to use and up to date. Social emotional materials. These materials are needed to support the work that has been done with the SEL program in grade K through 12. Capstone grader stipend. This stipend is needed to provide our teachers with compensation for grading the capstone projects at Seymour High School. CLS guided reading materials. These materials are needed to meet the needs of our young, struggling readers at Chatfield Lepresti School. Elementary math resources for both Bungie and Chatfield Lepresti School. These materials are needed since we have updated our curriculum in grades K through 5, and our older textbooks are currently out of date and unavailable. After adding in the above referenced items, our budget is now at a 4.9%, which represents $1,418,854 increase from last year's budget. While we would always like to add more into our budget, we also know and recognize the fiscal responsibility that we have to the town of Seymour. This being the case, we feel that this budget increase of 4.09% provides for the needs of all our students. Then after the clip notes portion in the budget, we have management summary, which takes you through the different cost categories and the increases that in each category for the budget. Once you review that, the next section is our superintendent's recommended budget financial statement in summary, as well in detail. Follow that. After that section is the spreadsheet for the healthcare cost calculation. You can see how we took the rates at 9.5% increase, calculated out on how many of our memberships in each category in union, and costed it right down to what we had to put in for the increase for this year's budget. Following that is the salary spreadsheets. Starts off with grants and continues all the way through. After that section, you will see a section of spreadsheets with detailed account information for various of our accounts. Let's see. Infrastructure services budget detail, the building repairs and maintenance and the tuition accounts, transportation, those kind of accounts that were all detailed out for your review. Following that is the historical enrollment that is done by NESDEC. And the final document is a draft that we put together for elementary projected class size for 21-22 and the high school and middle school projected figures for 6 through 12 for next year. And with that, we can open it up for any questions.
Okay, who would like to go first?
Mr. Chairman, Jim Garofalo.
Yes, go ahead, Jim.
Well, let me ask my question first, then I have a comment. The positions that are not going to be filled, the retirement positions, could you clarify for me why none of those is going to be filled?
So we feel that after conversations with the administrators, and they could certainly add and further clarify, that they're able to do it with other staff members they have. You know, for example, at the high school, that's why the increase of the music position is essential, because they have some cross-certified people, and the cross-certified people can cover other classes and therefore cover the need for our students, and then still give them the number of electives that they need as well. And at the middle school, not filling is similar. They feel that they can cover it with other teachers as well. And the other one that's not filled was due to a low interest in the actual area. So I can definitely have them broaden that, but I hope that answers your question, Mr. Garofalo.
Well, then a follow-up would, by using other staff, would we run a risk of any grievances by virtue of violation of contract concerning number of prep periods, et cetera?
So no, when the administrators have looked at it, they would not go over the contractual number of prep periods to therefore bring on a grievance. It would be appropriately done where they would still stay within the contract terms.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for that. And my comment insofar as this budget is concerned, I have serious reservation that we are going to have a 4+% increase granted for the Board of Education, considering, and of course, I don't have figures, the damage that COVID has done insofar as people who have been placed in the unemployed position. And if we have any significant number, or even a small number, I can't imagine that given the current circumstance, that we would see an approval of that budget. That's my comment. Thank you.
Okay, anyone else? Yes, Ms. Harmling.
Thank you. I agree with Jim 100%. And to me, I don't want to put out a number. I don't want to say, oh, we have to get it down to 2, because it's really all about what number can we have that will allow the town to hold its mill rate constant. That really has been the key to having our budget passed in the last 3, perhaps 4 years. I'm not exactly sure. So any increase that we have on our Board of Ed budget that's going to result in a subsequent increase in the mill rate tax, I do not think we have a shot of getting it passed this year. So question for Mr. Wilson and Mrs. Holmes through the chair is, has the first select woman or the Board of Finance given us a percentage increase to strive for that would allow the town to hold its mill rate steady given the other needs on the town side?
So originally the number was to be close to 2%. When we had our budget summit, we shared with Mr. Zawicki, the chair of the Board of Finance, that our number was high, just as we shared with you in the budget cliff notes, but that we were bringing it down to 4 or just under. And he said that's very good, as opposed to coming in at obviously 9.21%. At that time, he did not say we need it at 2 or else we're not looking at it. But you know, I know the town would like for it to be at 2. The first select woman would like for it to be close to 2. But as you can see in this document, you know, when you look at the Cliff Notes page, you know, only looking at 9 items to add to the budget from last year. In addition to that, not filling positions through retirements, you know, the team of administrators and us at central office have worked really hard keeping that in mind. And obviously, you know, if there's a place to go lower, we didn't feel coming in any lower than what we're advocating for would be the, you know, responsible thing for us to do, to present to the board. We understand that it is a collaborative board decision and decisions have to be made if further cuts need to be made to the budget. But this is a budget that we feel as a team we could present to the board this evening that meets the needs of our students.
Any other questions? Yes, Mrs. Bruno.
Follow up on Mr. Garfalo's question, with the not filling of positions due to retirement, what are the courses that are not going to be offered to students?
Mrs. Roden, if you could take that from the middle school perspective, and then Mr. Freund from the high school perspective.
So it's not because of the not fulfillment, Mrs. Bruno, it's because of the low interest. So we would most likely not be able to have a French A class coming in because of the low interest. And that's been for a few consecutive years. So we've been monitoring that. We'd be able to continue our current French A students and the French B with the use of the Edgenuity program when they're in grade 8, but we would still be able to have our Spanish A and Spanish B. And we've been, Mrs. Freeman and I have been working with Mrs. Calvert, our remaining world language teacher, of how we can build student interest with our incoming classes so that hopefully we could be coming in the next couple of years to the board asking for, you know, another world language teacher based on student interest.
Okay, Mrs. Bruno?
I have other questions, but I can give someone else a turn.
Okay, Mr.
Well, I think-
Champagne, I saw next.
Mr. Freund was going to finish from the high school
Oh, thank
perspective,
you.
answering Ms. Bruno's question.
Yes,
Okay, go
thank
ahead,
you.
I'm sorry.
So by extending the music position, the part-time music position to a full-time position, one of our music teachers who's cross-certified in social studies and music will be able to take on more social studies teaching responsibilities that Mr. DeMarco would have had. Also, by using 0.4 of our building level sub to help us with the English courses, again, depending upon registration, we could also free up cross-certified English social studies teachers to cover social studies positions. It gives us instructional coverage, flexibility, more so than we've ever had. Because the more cross-certified people, the more flexibility we have depending upon enrollment and electives and other things. So this move is to add a lot of flexibility while maintaining all of our courses we're currently running.
So you would still be able to offer AP psychology?
We would recruit somebody and we'd probably have to send them away to TAC for the time to get the training, but yes.
We already have somebody in the works.
Okay.
Thanks, Paul.
Is there money in the budget for that professional development?
I'm sure there is, but it's fairly typical when we have a new AP teacher, they go and attend this training. It's usually at a Taft school in the summertime.
Okay, any other, oh, that was not good. Mr. Champagne.
Thanks. So just a quick question. Do we know where we stand if we took, as a baseline, where we are if we satisfy our contractual obligations, safety enhancements, insurance, things like that, where we are at an increase at that level? And then also, I actually just saw a Johnson's Control truck drive by a couple days ago, and I'm wondering if we're starting to reap some of those benefits that they've promised us with their enhancements.
Great question, Mr. Champagne. I'll take the second part and I'll have Sherry take the first part. The second part is we've expressed that at the budget summit as well. We're not seeing the savings yet from the Johnson Control project. We wish we would have by now. We should not have seen, for example, an increase in our electrical line items. We should have seen a decrease. Obviously, they're saying that's due to the delay in the projects and so on and so forth. I know the Board of Finance is also looking into that. I know the town is also looking into that, but we have not, to answer your question, have not seen the benefits yet of that project. That's not to say that we won't, but for next year's budget, those increases in those line items were what Sherry, Mrs. Holmes, I apologize, was asked to do from the town because of not seeing those benefits. So you're 100% correct in that part. We wish we would have seen more benefits, but we have yet to see those. The first part of your question, Mrs. Holmes, I'll let you take that.
Sure. I would have to rework the numbers, but what we were looking at is a couple scenarios. We were able to get it down to a 2.52% in the budget, and that would be eliminating some positions and also eliminate 4 content area teachers at the middle school if we were to move in that direction. Of course, I think the 0.5%, we would have to come up and put all the lines at 0 increase in the supplies and that kind of thing. So we would level fund that area to get it down to 2. But it's a matter of choices as to, everything else is contractually budgeted for. It's just a matter of making the determination to level fund the other 300 down to 700 or 800 from last year. I don't know if that answers your question, but I can certainly.
I mean, I think it's important to sort of get a baseline, right, of everything that we're contractually obligated to do, things like supplies, security, and stuff like that, and see where that number falls, and then work in some of the, critical things that we feel we need, because when I look at that number, over 4%, I'm with Jim and Kristen, both Kristens. I don't see that happening. So, maybe as a group, we take a look at that and figure out where our base starting line is, and then possibly go up from there. And that doesn't mean cutting teachers or anything like that. It's just where do we stand through things like attrition and retirement and stuff like that.
Currently, right now, all the retirements have been figured in the budget. We haven't gotten any new ones recently that we certainly can share at this time. I'm sure, as we go on, every week we do get some more information, new information. We certainly can keep you abreast of that. But as of right now, we have received everything that we know as far as retirements go. My guess is if you want to bring it right down, you probably bring it under 2 somewhere, 1.8, 1.7. I don't know. I mean, it would be definitely under 2, but then we'd have to make choices, and the board would have to make choices as to what additional amounts that we can get it to 2%.
Okay, Kristen Harmling, a whole 1 minute, please. Chris, are you all set? Okay, go ahead, Kristen.
Yeah, so in years past, historically, we always did what we called a level services budget, and we deliberately and purposely moved away from that in the past several years because it ended up being sort of like a fake baseline, because we call it level services, right? But we've got teachers retiring, teachers moving in and out. And so it really almost became an artificial number. So while I hear what Chris is saying, it is a nice to know. And given that we're looking at asking for the largest increase we've asked for in some years, maybe it is an okay baseline to have for our own edification. But we really tried very hard to get out of the cycle of putting together a level services budget and then going to the Board of Finance to express why the level services budget wasn't enough. And really, from an equity perspective, right, equal doesn't mean equitable. So we might be keeping those level of services the same for our students, but that might actually require more staff. So we deliberately moved away from that, but I hear what you're saying, Chris. And if the board and the board chair thinks that's helpful, we do that. But I have a clarifying question for Mrs. Holmes. You said, when Chris asked, well, what would a level services essentially look like if we didn't add anything on top? You mentioned losing or reducing our teachers at one of the schools by 4. Are you saying that that is on top of? So if all 9 added items were taken away, we would still have to reduce existing staff? So after retirement, et cetera, we'd have to reduce existing staff to hit 2 point something? And again, I don't want to put numbers into I just don't want to leave people with the impression that, oh, if we have to come in at 2, we've got to lay 4 people up. That's what I'm trying to caution against. So that's why I'm asking for clarity.
Well, if we move in the direction of cross teaching subjects, with eliminating some of the position above, like the library media position, the nurse floater.
So only the new positions.
And the 4 permanent subs with benefits. If we eliminate that, and then we eliminate, if we're moving in the direction of cross teaching across, different subject areas, which I guess is a conversation that we can have. at some point. I don't know if that's the direction we're going to go in, but it has been talked about. So I guess we'd have to eliminate those positions I told you about, plus the 4 content area teachers at the middle school to arrive at my 2.52%. Just throwing that out there.
That's what I'm confused about when you say the 4 content area teachers at the middle school. I don't know what you're referring to.
Okay. Mr. Wilson, you want to help me out with that one?
Yeah.
The subjects that we're thinking of?
Yep. So Ms. Harmeling, that was the question that you had posed to Ms. Holmes and myself and Mrs. Tenza, and I forget who else was on it, that if we were to move away from the team model at the middle school for grades 7 and 8, if we move away from the team model, in essence, we would eliminate 4 content area teachers. And what Mrs. Holmes was referring to is if you eliminate 4 content area teachers and you eliminate items on the list of 9, them being the 4 permanent building subs, the nurse floater, the library media, then that would bring us down to a 2.52% increase. So keeping in the budget would be the special education teacher plus the 3 paraprofessionals at the high school, the 0.6 at the high school, the capstone grader, the social emotional materials, the guided reading materials, and the mathematics resources. So those would stay, and that would bring you to the 252. So what for example, if you're looking at that list of 9, just throwing it out there, making it up, and you were to say, hey, Sherry, can you tell me what would, if you eliminated the 4 subs, what would our budget be? Our budget would be 3.68%. If you were to say, hey, Sherry, eliminate the capstone grader, we would bring it down to 4.03%. So we've done that in anticipation because we're only looking at 9 items, as we said. And, and I compliment you, Ms. Harmeling, because I believe in years past, you've been the one to be a strong advocate of asking for what we think our students need and not trying to get it along. And I don't want to misquote you, but you said something to the effect of not getting along on bare bones. And, this is where we understand that it's tight. We understand that a number of 4% is high. I mean, we're not sitting here saying it's not, but doing our due diligence as a team of administrators, we feel that was appropriate with that list of 9 items. But if you were to look at that list of 9 and say, listen, we really need to strip everything out, the one thing I could tell you, while everything is important, that's why it made the cut, the mathematics materials at our elementary school, we need them. We don't, you're on the curriculum technology committee. That's something that you've heard already. So I know I'm preaching to the wrong choir there, but that's something that's a non-negotiable. The SEL learning materials, non-negotiable. We have a big SEL push in our strategic plan, and especially through the COVID pandemic, our SEL materials are paramount. So when you look at that plus those other items, and that's why, Mrs. Holmes was just saying those 3 other items, if we had to scrape it down, those are maybe the 3 that you scrape down, but not that would be beneficial. So that's kind of the hard work, and not to say we're passing the hard work off to the board, but that's kind of where we were at in the process to share with you guys.
Yeah.
If I was to take a look at this budget again, that's the point I would start at, is the 2.52%, and then go through with the team and work on what else that we can do.
Okay, Kristen, before I come back to you, could I ask Mrs. Roden to explain more carefully for me and probably other people the proposed moving away from teams and what that would look like?
So, Mr. Shamel, that was shared with me as a that it was brought up as a possible suggestion that we would then have our students just working within just the different content areas. So instead of being committed to, like, say, white team on grade 8, they'd then be moving throughout the building to the different content area teachers throughout the building. So 6, 7, and 8 intermingling throughout the building.
Okay, so what you're saying then is that teachers, and I'm sure the certification, a teacher could teach a 6th grade English, a 7th grade English, and an 8th grade English.
As
Or
long as they
language
were,
arts.
as long as we have those certifications, correct?
No,
We'd
that's
have
what I'm
to-
saying, obviously.
Correct.
Yeah. All right, Kristen, Jay, I saw Jay's hand up first. I'll come to Kristen, then Kristen Bruno. Jay?
Thank you. Through the chair. Is that better? Sorry about that.
Go
No
ahead.
echo. Through the
No
chair,
problem.
Mrs. Roden, just a quick question. You mentioned about the French A, B through Edgenuity. I think it would be for the B students, the advanced students. What would be how would that work in the sense somebody would still have to monitor them? No, or would it be with a teacher? I just missed that, but could you explain a little bit more? I'm sorry.
Sure, definitely. So there's 9 students currently, Mr. Hatfield, so who would then move up into grade 8 for the French B. So Mrs. Freemuth is very familiar with Edgenuity from the work this year. So she would be working collaboratively. We'd have to reach out to Mr. Lucky and Mr. Freund at the high school so that we could have a high school French teacher just support us in the scope and sequence of it if they needed to review assessments, but then the children would be on the Edgenuity program to complete their 2 years to be sort of, to accomplish for the French one to be ready for high school. So, and we'd have them in a classroom too, where obviously where a person would physically be with them, but would not be instructing them, just monitoring them.
So through the chair, if I could have
Go ahead,
follow-up question
follow
on
up.
that.
Go ahead.
You know, what that person in the sense, and no disrespect to anybody that it might be, what does that actually mean? In the sense, and that could be a later conversation for another meeting, but are we saying that it would be a paraprofessional or we haven't yet identified that person?
We haven't necessarily, sorry.
No, is there an additional cost for that piece? That's what I kind of was getting at.
No. So we would look, most likely, Mr. Hatfield, would be looking at what our class sizes are to begin with. So, for example, it would not necessarily be a paraprofessional. It could be a non-certified staff member who could just monitor the students because there would not be the instructional piece of it. But we did have some discussions, Mrs. Freemuth and I, about it could be the physical person. We could have the students in with our tutor while she's working with a small group of SRBI students. The students could be in the classroom that way. We would meet the needs of the students the best that we could based on the teacher's instructional schedules as well as the class sizes of the other classes as well.
Mm-hmm. So, and just my last quick follow-up, maybe Mr. Shamel through the chair, maybe that's something that I know the question was asked before, what kind of courses we might be losing. Maybe that's something we could explore further in future meetings as to some of the music classes or other directions that we might have to curtail, but we could expand otherwise. Thank you.
Sure, thank you.
Okay, Kristen Harmling.
Thank you. I have a follow-up question for Mrs. Roden and then a follow-up question for Mr. Wilson. Mrs. Roden, why would doing away with teams in 7th and 8th grade mean that students were all over the building and teachers would be teaching potentially 6th, 7th, and 8th? Why wouldn't it just mean 7th graders stay in the 7th grade wing, but they're just not separated into blue and gold anymore? Same with 8th grade.
I think we'd have to look at our class sizes to make sure that it was equitable. Then also, we have quite a drop in the number of our 6th grade enrollment coming in. So that's where we'd have to look at that equity among the class sizes as well for the teachers.
So actually then it might be worth discussion of not having team in 6th grade too. I just like it as a transition year, but I mean, I don't think, the intent was not to make a decision like that this evening. The intent was really just to have the conversation about, is that a way to save some money, but not infringe upon the learning experiences of students. So, I mean, I think it's just, good conversation to have, but I don't know that anyone's looking for a decision on that tonight. So if I could go back to my specific budget questions for Mr. Wilson, Mr. Smala?
Concerning what first though, Kristen, because I'm wondering if Kristen Bruno has the same question on the
Teams. Yeah, good point.
on that first, because I do also, Kristen.
Okay, sure. Then yeah, go ahead. Let's continue that.
Okay, Mrs. Bruno.
So yeah, my question about the team, because that was not a change that was in the summary of the budget. So this is something new presented tonight. I'm just wondering, what are the pros and cons of doing that? And where does, Mr. Wilson, where do you stand? And the middle school administration, where do you stand on making that change? Is it good for kids?
So go ahead, Mr. Wilson.
No, go ahead, Ms. Roden. Go ahead, by all means.
No. I just want to clarify, Mrs. Bruno, too, and to the board. This was not an idea presented by the middle school administration, to move forward with. It was shared with us as a possibility recently. So in order for me to give you a very clear-cut answer of the definite pros and cons, I would need more time to sit and discuss this with Mrs. Freemuth and, with central office administration as well. So I just, I want to be clear, it was not proposed by Mrs. Freemuth or me.
It came from me, everyone. I can clear it up really directly.
Hold it. Wait a minute. Hold it, Kristen. It's Jody's speaking, please. And then Michael's next.
And I just did that answer your question, Mrs. Bruno? Because I would want to give you clear information, so I would definitely need to go back.
Okay, and Michael?
Yeah, no, so so thank you, Ms. Harmeling. It came from Ms. Harmeling as just a possible strategy to lower the budget even further. In terms of my opinion, since you asked Mrs. Bruno, I believe that the team model, and being a former middle school teacher moons ago, I taught in both the team model, but then when our numbers declined, we switched from a team and we went to more of that traditional model where you had your math team, your ELA team, your social studies team, and your science team. And our numbers are pushing towards that. Are we there yet? No, we're probably on the cusp. But then again, we have some new families moving in, so you never know, right? It all is contingent upon that. I think there are pros and cons to it. I think, the cons are obviously you lose that team aspect of having that team of teachers really working with those same students, and the benefits of when you call a team meeting about a student and the parents and so on and so forth, everyone knows the child, and obviously relationships and things of that nature. The pros of having just a math and an ELA and a social studies and a science department, though, is it does allow you, if the numbers are dwindling, to lower the number of staff, right? And we try not to do that. I mean, I've worked very hard, as has everyone on this call, to keep all of our staff numbers where they are, because we think we need all of our staff members to meet the learning needs of our students. But if our numbers continue to go down, then losing the team model is one way. And I know, because I've lived it, just in former districts, that can be done, where you can still meet the learning needs and obviously lessen the number of staff, if you will, if that is a concern. However, to echo Mrs. Roden's point, that was never brought up by the middle school administration, nor was it brought up by central office administration. However, it is something just to look at and to put the idea out there, as Ms. Harmeling had suggested, if indeed the numbers push come to shove, rubber meets the road, have to come down somewhere, some way, some shape, some form. I necessarily don't think we're there right now. I think you have 9 items in front of you that have been advocated for. And if it's the board's pleasure to eliminate, 7 out of the 9, for example, as I said, or 8 or 9 of the 9, or 8 of the 9, because I really don't think you can eliminate the math materials or the social emotional. That's just my opinion. But, we're advocating for all 9 because we think we need them. So it's a tough choice. And as I said earlier, and I didn't want to say it tongue in cheek, that's the tough job of the board to make that decision, where we advocated and cut the original list down, which, as you can see, was quite lengthier, if you will, and then to come to this list of 9 items, which we think still moves the district in the direction that we wish it to move forward for all of our students and teachers. So It's definitely not easy, but we have that information there. And as I shared earlier through Mr. Champagne's question, we have that information. Hey, if you take out this, what's the percentage? If you take out this, what's the percentage? If you take out that, it's hard for us to strip all of that out and to just come to you with those two items. We just couldn't do that in good faith and good effort, moving the district forward. And I hope, the board members understand that, but I know that was off on a tangent as opposed to the team question. I apologize, but since I was asked, I just took the opportunity.
Okay, now, Ms. Harmon, if you would please, I would like to ask board members who have not asked a question, if any of the board members who have not asked a question would like to ask a question first, then I would come back to you. So that goes for Mr. Stanek, Mr. Kubik, and Mrs. Nesteriak, who has joined us also. So if any of you have a question before I have Ms. Harmley come back on. So who would like to go first? Peter?
I'm good right now. I've some of the questions that I was going to ask have already been asked or entertained, so I'm good right now.
Okay, Mr. Stanek?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Fred Stanek. Like Peter, the questions I was going to ask have been asked. However, I do have a comment. I do agree with my other fellow board members that there's no way this budget will be passed by the Board of Finance. There's just no way we're going to get this percentage. I think we should come in with somewhere in ask for somewhere in the low 3% range, hoping that we get something close to that. But I think we're asking for too much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Stanek. Mrs. Nesteriak.
Good evening, this is Beth Nesteriak. So just jumping off Mr. Stanek's comment, I think for board members, especially those that aren't as familiar with some of the history behind how budgeting has been done here, I think one of the other board members talked about pros and cons and the sacrifices that we need to make in order to ensure that the best budget's put forth. I think some more data around that as you make the decision to lower the budget in terms of risk and consequences of the financial decisions you're making, transparency into that would be very helpful for me personally as a board member, so I can better understand what sacrifices we're asking to make. And as Sherry said it, what are we prioritizing for the budget and what are the implications against that from a financial perspective? So more insight into that for me would be extremely helpful as we move to refine the numbers. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Harmling.
So if I could, through the chair, could I clarify with Ms. Nesteriak and also Mr. Champagne and others have the same concern? Do you mean something like having numbers put against the retirement savings and then, so that's the savings portion of the presented budget, and then have a number put next to each of the 9 ads for the budget? Because that's one thing I wish that I had in front of me as well. Is that the type of thing that you mean?
Yeah, I think that when you look at prioritization around any type of budgeting, right, it's obviously numbers, that match the effort. Mm-hmm. For example, when we're talking about permanent building subs, right? Well, what's the cost benefit when we're paying subs out of a different account? Like, is there an analysis done that supports building subs versus just regular subs? There would be it's either a wash, there's a savings there, that's just a silly example of things that show the thought in terms of, risk and consequence. It's like a weighted average of these are the priorities for us in terms of what we're trying to achieve. And as Mr. Wilson used the words, move the district forward. And these are the costs associated with those. So board, do you want to do priority 1, 2, 3, or we don't have enough money, so we can only do 1? I guess that's what I'm trying to convey. I apologize if I wasn't clear.
If I could, to the chair, no, I think we were on the same page. It's putting numbers behind each of these things as a starting place, and then having a conversation about the what ifs. What if we didn't do this and what if we did? Could I ask why we feel like we need to put the 4 permanent building subs into our operating budget this year? They were paid for out of a grant the current school year. We will have grant money for the next school year. related to COVID. So is there an opportunity to maintain the funding for those positions in the same way we're doing it now through CARES Act funding?
Okay, Michael or Ms. Holm want to answer that, and then I saw Mrs. Bruno, you'll be next.
Sure. So I can definitely start, and Sherry, feel free to jump in if I miss anything. Ms. Harmling is correct. We did do that through the grant, but we also stated that, hopefully that through the grant, we would be able to put this in moving forward through budgets, because we see the benefit of having that consistency with a sub in the building to also help, obviously whenever a teacher may be out or whatever the case may be, having that consistency and having that person there, which places also less strain on our need of just getting outside substitutes in. Obviously, there's a possibility that, in that next grant, that could be written in. However, we just need to be very, very careful. We can't supplant with grants. And if we don't get the grant, then we're saying that we won't get those permanent building subs. So advocating for it in a budget is just exactly what we said we would do, because we see the benefits of having those permanent building subs. So while we did start them in a grant, the process moving forward was to put at least one set, if not two. If this board recalls, we talked about the possibility of two. We know we wouldn't get 8 permanent building subs. So advocating for the 4. So yes, for example, if that gets taken off the table from a budgetary perspective and we are able to get the grant and put it in, so be it. But if we're not, then we have to just all be on the same page and realize that that position would go away. Mrs. Holmes, feel free to add to that if I missed anything.
Yes, if I could. Right now, we don't know what it is that we can use that second round of money for. We're still waiting from the state on a document that tells us, yes, you can use it for this, this, and this. That's the document they handed out last time, and that's the document we are all waiting for. In addition to that, we're waiting to see how much money we receive for that, And my thought, and this is just my thinking, is that for certain, I know we'll probably be able to use it for the distant learning teachers, given the fact that if the governor doesn't change what the structure is now, as far as parents having that option of remote learning at home, that we're going to need to continue with the distant learning teachers. So my thought, if there's enough money there, would be the direction I would go with until such time that that decision is made differently. But we are waiting, and as of today, I did not hear anything from the state. There's no document online or even on the website. So as soon as I get that, I will be able to share that information with the board. But as of right now, I don't know what it is that we can spend that money on yet.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Holmes. Mrs. Bruno.
2 questions. One, the building sub position, is that, it says with benefits, is that a teacher contract position?
It's $115 a day times, I don't have it here, but it mirrors the teacher's contract. It goes along with, benefits. They've provided benefits with this. And
so are they in the bargaining unit?
They are, I don't believe they are. Are they, Mr. Wilson? I'm sorry. I don't believe they are in the bargaining unit.
Permanent building subs, no, they're not.
No. They do get a contract that is similar to the teacher's contract in that the benefits that we give them mirror the teacher's contract. It would be $115 a day times 182 days, roughly.
So I would agree with the other board members that if we could have these items costed out, for that one particularly, for each of the 4 positions, and then as a total.
I do have that costed out already. The salaries would be the $20,000 930
Right.
each. And
On
I would
that
put it on
page.
paper.
On
Oh,
that
yeah.
page is
I
where
will. Yeah,
determining
absolutely. I
priorities.
can do that for the board.
And then I had a same thing with the retirement. We have savings from retirement, but if you look over, there's a $75,000 increase in retiree benefits. So I'm just wondering how those balance out.
The retiree benefits are the amount of money that we pay to our retirees for longevity. Payment is 5 months worth of their salary. And we have previously costed out teachers that are on there. Some have dropped off because they're ending as far as the amount that we owe them, and others have been added each year. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's not something that we can certainly look for savings for, because these are actual teachers that have retired, and the cost is the 5 months of salary for a longevity stipend.
And that's
paid out.
permanently?
That's paid out in August in one lump sum.
Okay.
So we do have to sustain that account for sure.
Okay, Kristen, you all set? Because I have a follow-up to what you asked.
Sure.
Okay. Sherry, on the longevity, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but we've negotiated longevity out of our contract, or am I mistaken?
Have we? What contract in particular?
The teacher's contract.
Well, we have one more year, and then we have to negotiate them.
Okay, so what you're telling me is we have not negotiated.
We have not negotiated out the longevity.
Gotcha.
Mm-mm.
Gotcha. Then my follow-up to that is, where are we with the capability or the thinking of offering an early retirement to help with the budget issues? Have we done that already during the term of this contract?
My understanding is that we did that before I came on board in Seymour. During the life of a contract, you only can do it once. You're only allowed to do it once.
Okay.
So I would guess that when we start negotiations with teachers, which is a year out, we probably would take a look at that and see where we're at with that.
Okay. All right, Mrs. Harmling?
Can we just get a double check on those 2 points? Because I thought the language was we had to do it at least once during the 3-year contract, not that we could only do it once. And I also thought for sure that we have taken out the longevity payment for newer teachers, that it only applies for teachers who have started, before X date. So I just want to do a definitive check on that, because that's not what my recollection has been.
Mr. Chairman, Fred Stanek, I agree
Yes.
with Ms. Harmeling. I think she's correct.
I will
Okay.
double check the language with that. But currently in figuring the budget, I've included all the longevity that should be included for each teacher per the contract.
Okay.
I think it's new hires.
Okay, other questions?
Chairman, Jim
Yes.
Garofalo.
Let me look it up.
Go ahead, Jim.
All right. I'd like to share a thought that's not a very pleasant thought, but it's come to mind during listening to all of the questions in the conversation. Given the plethora of letters that have come forward from dissatisfied parents, unfortunately, I could not quantify this even if I tried, but I would be not surprised that we may very well lose a base of support by parents in the community, at least from those who have expressed their dissatisfaction. But if you extrapolate, there certainly have to be a number of others who don't believe that they would come forward and express their views. They would just remain in the background and speak with the vote. So it's something I think we should not necessarily overlook. And I don't know how we could convince parents that what we're doing, despite their dissatisfaction, needs their support. Thank you.
Okay, I'm sensing that we are going to need another meeting because there seems to be questions that board members have that we're not going to be able to have tonight. So unless there's other questions that we can get to our financial people in the administration, I'm thinking that we should prepare to have a second budget meeting with different figures. Is there any consensus or any agreement with that statement by the chair? Ms. Harmling.
Mr. Stroll, could you just articulate, or Mr. Wilson, articulate what our timeline is in terms of having to submit something to the town?
So
Through the chair, can I just add to that? Sorry, just along with that, I think it'd be good if you kind of reported back some of the actions you're taking from this discussion so that we're all clear in terms of expectations of what the next round will look like.
Sure. So I think, well, so three things. I think there's a couple of things that would make that a little difficult. But the first one, the town technically wanted the budget by the 25th. Now, Mrs. Holmes obviously can ask for an extension. We could ask for an extension, till possibly next Wednesday, which would mean that we would have to meet on Monday evening. In terms of meeting Monday evening, prior to that, we would have to then, if I'm hearing everyone correctly, almost reprioritize that list of 9 with numerical figures next to it to see exactly, in essence, what would make the cut or not make the cut and what percentage the board would feel comfortable at. I think that would be the most streamlined approach to doing that. However, I would just want to make sure that obviously we would do our best to get that to you as quickly as possible, hopefully by the dare I say, end of the day tomorrow, but we can do that. But by putting that into almost a priorities list, then when the board comes together on Monday evening, that the board would be ready to really make it a true working session and say, okay, take off items 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1, 2, 5, 7, whatever the case may be. Sherry spits out a number after taking those out. And that would be the board's budget that would get recommended to the town and then become the Board of Education's budget, which would then be presented to the Board of Finance, would be my recommendation in hearing the different comments from several board members. So I think that activity is definitely doable. Putting those numbers really in terms of what that Cliff Notes page and really saying, okay, this is where it would be if we take the following off. And as I said, that would take work on our end because we would meet with our administrators again tomorrow. We would then sit down and do the work, and Sherry could submit the document to you almost in kind of a streamlined approach to an Excel doc that says, okay, here's items 1 through 9, and here's what it would be. And then what is the board's pleasure, if that would suffice, just to make sure we're clear.
I think that would be satisfactory for me. I can't speak for everybody else. Mrs. Harmling.
It would be satisfactory for me too, Mr. Stramello, especially if you could share with the board this budget and the numbers in Excel from my Board of Finance days. All of that they were live numbers. So the Board of Finance chair could say, what happens if we take the school budget down to $100,000 increase, and boom, you knew what the mill rate was. Obviously, we're not going to, have a mill rate because we don't have the full budget, but that's, I think, exactly the type of thing that would help us. And if we can get that earlier so that we could play around with our own, if any of us is so inclined, I mean, that would be tremendous if we could iterate on priorities in real time and see the impact that they had on the budget number.
And just out of respect for the team of administrators, as I said, from a procedural standpoint, we would call a meeting tomorrow to talk with them, to rehash the 9, come up with that list, and then throw it in the Excel and taking it out, what it would mean. So understood, and I get you, and I think that is a clean way to do it. But just from a process, that's why I said by the end of the day tomorrow, because I want to, be fair to the process and hear from the team again, and then obviously put it in that order for you guys.
Okay, did I say Mrs. Bruno's hand up?
I have maybe 5 or 6 questions, and not all are related to those 9 items. I'm happy to email them if you think that folks would be able to respond or to address them on Monday.
Yeah, an email would be awesome, because we would exactly what we've done whenever we see any other email from a board member, we would definitely respond. Obviously send it to Mrs. Holmes' attention and CC myself and Mrs. Tenza and Mr. Stramello, and then we will definitely get back to you and share your response with the whole board if that's what you would like.
Thank you.
Okay, Kristen, are you sure that you don't want to share any of them now, or you think they could just be answered easily through the email? And the reason I ask that is sometimes a board member's question sparks somebody else's brain to think in a different way. So that's what.
I think I have one that I'd like to ask tonight, if that's okay.
Sure.
And that is regarding the athletic director and the assistant athletic director, and how they're funded and where they live in this budget.
Okay, is that Michael, or is that going to be Mr. Freund? Who's going to do that?
Mrs. Holmes has that information.
Okay.
And it should be in the budget document too. Give me a minute. That's under the high school salaries account.
Yes.
Under the certified staff, regular instruction is the assistant athletic director, and the same with the regular athletic director is under there as well. So they're in the high school salary account, the 111.
Okay, Kristen.
I'm sorry, you're saying that the assistant principal, there's a portion of his salary as the athletic director that's in the teacher regular instruction account?
No, the assistant athletic director is under the 111, and that amount is factored in as part of her salary. And as far as an athletic director,
it's probably just within the administration salary. I don't believe we've ever broken it out.
Right.
No, we have
right.
never.
It is within the 110 account, which is the administration salary. I can break it out for you if you like, but
right.
That's where
yeah.
That's
Sherry,
where it is.
Yeah. Sherry, if I'm looking very quickly, if I follow Mrs. Federowicz all the way out, I see an other column that lists $4,967.
What's that? Oh, I'm sorry.
I see on the line item for Mrs. Federowicz, if you go all the way out to the end of it, it says 4,967. I don't know.
There are
if that-
stipends that she gets as far as on certain sports as well.
Okay, so that's her, that's
There's
probably
another
her-
page, if you would,
Go ahead.
that speak to the stipends for sports. And she's on there, a few of them, and she's on there for a stipend.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, Kristen Bruno?
So I just want to make sure that those two positions are funded at the same level as they were for this year. Because I remembered last year, I was a new board member, and there were some questions about the job description of the high school assistant principal did not include that AD piece. So I just want to make sure that we're okay with the funding rolled into.
Yes, the funding is in the budget. It's rolled into the budget. So those two positions are in here.
Okay.
So there should be no issue with that this year.
Okay, and I'm sure if there is a concern, the administrators union will raise that.
Okay, Kristen, could you repeat that because it was very quiet?
I'm sorry, I just said, I'm sure that if there is a concern about that, that the administrators union will raise that concern.
Correct.
Yes. Okay, thank you. All righty. So, we've heard from Mr. Wilson that says that if we wanted to look at this again, that we have to meet on Monday. So I'm going to ask us to, and I can't, and that's all I can do is ask you is to check your calendars and try to clear your calendars for that. And I would hope that we can just limit that budget hearing to just the budget and nothing else on the agenda. Do I hear a negative thought to my last statement?
Through the chair, I just had a follow-up question from the previous statements, but I'll wait until your response is heard.
Okay. It looks like I'm not getting a response, Jay, so go ahead. Yes, Kristen.
I think, Mr. Chair, that will depend on how the rest of this meeting goes.
Oh. Okay. Mr. Hatfield.
Thank you, through the chair. So I just wanted to follow up though with Mrs. Holmes' statements there, with the other column. I know under Appendix E, and my mouse is very slow here, but I don't see the piece about, I see Appendix E because yes, volleyball or coaching sports, but to your point or Mrs. Bruno's point about the athletic director position, excuse me, assistant athletic director position, where is that actually located in here again?
If you look on the high school salaries, certified salaries, follow it down to find Bedowitz here. And I just saw her.
No, and I'm following.
It's added into the salary.
So, okay.
So it's not broken out.
So the total,
Right, but
it's not broken out. It's part of the total.
Right, but I don't think, I see here in the sense that it's, we have other people on that list that are 6 year 13 and their number's a little bit different when they're, but I'm not, if you look along the line, it's not really, it should be more broken out in the sense that somebody else has 6 years, step 13, and then they have that other portion, and their other portion is more money, and their other longevity is more money. And so there is no real differentiation of that. So I don't necessarily think that it should just be lumped in there. for,
We could break it out. It was never done so before, but I'd be happy to do it this year. Absolutely.
but I'm saying in the previous conversation, it seems as it was my opinion that it was stating that the other was that amount, but that's not true.
No, it's not broken out,
But I'm saying
but I
in the
can.
previous conversation that you were having with in response to Mrs. Bruno's question, when you mentioned the word other, it appeared to me that you were mentioning that was the stipend.
No, I did not. That wasn't the case. I was just saying that in the salaries in the 111, the total of her salary includes the amount of money that she gets for the assistant athletic director.
Well, that would be in the total, not the base.
And I will certainly break it out and put it in a different column so that you can see it's there.
Right, but I'm saying I don't think that's fair to that, I don't think it's fair to include that in that column because that's not necessarily true. And again, it's not in the base. I mean, it would be in the total, not the base.
It is
Correct?
part of her salary. It is part of her salary though.
Right, but it's not because it's an additional stipend. If that position was eliminated, it wouldn't be part of her salary contractually.
Correct, and we would take it out of there.
Nice, a
I can
clarifying
put it in
question.
a different location and earmark it for her that way, and that sounds like where you're going with this, and I'd be happy to do it. It just was never broken out before.
But I don't
All
believe
right,
that's
Jay?
true.
All right,
Yes, I
Jay?
don't believe that's true, but I'll go through the chair.
All right. Ms. Harmling?
A clarifying question. Sherry, when we look at the salaries for middle school and high school, so we're just at the salaries pages, for any teacher that has an Appendix E stipend, whether it's sport or non-sport, is the stipend included in the listing of salaries that we see?
No, it's on a separate sheet.
Okay, right. Okay, so that's what I thought. That's exactly why I think that we're getting the reaction that Mrs. Federowicz should not be included in there either. Her extra for being our assistant athletic director, that shouldn't be in there either. So
Okay.
that should be
I can
pulled out and
break
put
it out.
somewhere else.
I can break it out,
Yeah,
absolutely.
great.
I'll put it right on that sheet, and that way it'll be noticeable with the title Assistant Athletic Director there so that you can see it.
Okay.
I'm happy to do it. Not a
Through
problem.
the chair, I have one more question. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Jay.
I just want to clarify though, and this was my own fault that I seem to have missed it. But again, in the past, we did have included in here when people were department heads, et cetera. That was on a separate sheet, but it's not listed here. I don't believe. Is that correct, Mrs. Holmes?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the whole question. Could you please repeat it for me?
So just to clarify with Mrs. Harmling's other point, department head, et cetera, is that where that other column is going? Because again, I see much more in that other column than before. And previously, it was broken out if they were department head, et cetera. But now it seems to be put in the other column.
In the
I just
other
want to-
column, it's either a degree change or a differential or a special education. They get a stipend for being special ed teachers. That goes in that column as well.
Okay.
Okay, Jay?
Okay. Yep.
So why don't I do this? I break out everything across the salary sheets to indicate what each category is, rather than have an other column. I can do that
Okay.
if that's your pleasure. It seems like that's what you want me to do. So
Okay.
we'll do it.
All right. Kristen Harmon?
Yep. I just want to quickly call Mr. Hatfield's attention to all the stipend B all the stipend salaries are listed separately starting on page 24 in the budget document. So they are all there. And,
Yeah.
and Holmes said that these salaries, so for example, if we look at level coordinator salary of $3,842, that is not then also in that particular teacher's line item salary on the building level
No, it's
salary.
not. You're correct. It's not.
So I'm not sure why we need to do anything different except for break out the specific portion for the assistant athletic director. I think that's the only misstep we're having, Jay, unless I'm missing something that you're asking for.
No, I think it's things like AP coordinator or AP, AP stipends, things to Mrs. Holmes' earlier point that we're not necessarily seeing listed in there. Like if you're teaching the differentials for, you teach an AP course or a UConn course. That was my clarifying statement. I'm sorry.
And that's not how it was originally broken out, but I'll be happy to do it.
Okay, Chris and Bruno?
In addition to breaking out the assistant athletic director, I think because of the change in the job description at the last contract negotiation, we also have to break out the athletic director. Because from what I understood last year is that it's been separated from the assistant principal position.
Okay. I'll work on that.
Okay.
It's in there.
All right. Any other questions? Okay, then we will leave the budget portion and we will go to the next item on the agenda, and that's the school reopening. And I will start with Mr. Wilson.
Certainly. Good evening, Mr. Stramello and board members again. I know this is a discussion that the board wanted to have, so I'll keep my comments brief. Through the communication that I sent out last week, we were trending in the right direction. But then in terms of 18 new cases last week, as well as our number rising significantly on the state data tracker, that made us make the decision to stay out these 4 days in hopes that our numbers would get better. And looking at our data tracker, our numbers did get better in terms of 18 down to 8 cases as of right now this evening. And obviously we know that the pandemic is fluid and ever changing, and that could change again tomorrow. We don't know. But right now, 18 down to 8, and our number of people in quarantine from 65 down to 59, with that number declining, is also a positive. However, what's very concerning is our number that got released this evening on the state data tracker, which went from a 74 to an 86.1. I know Mr. Stramello and I were on a call together with the director of the Naugatuck Valley Health District earlier this evening. We shared all of our data metrics, meaning our in-house data metrics, and how we are looking good in terms of our in-house data metrics, but that number of 86.1 is very concerning. She also is concerned by it. She also understands, and just as we all do, wanting to come back to hybrid, some sort of hybrid learning. She carefully instructed Mr. Stramello and I to not think about any kind of full return with numbers that high in terms of a state data tracker. However, she also cautioned, with the factors of going on an increase from a 74 to an 86.1, to really assess the situation in terms of our metrics and what our metrics look like before opening up for any type of in-person learning, even hybrid with our increased population. So that's a lot for us to think about and to discuss and to talk about, and having the time of this meeting to do that. What's very concerning is when you look at that tracker, we're 22 out of 168 towns, in terms of our number this evening. Once again, that is one data point. We look at all data points, as we've said time and time again, and I'd be remiss if I didn't thank everyone on the team. Jessica, Tom, Amy, our district doctor, Dr. Curtis, Becky, Mr. Stramello, Mr. Hatfield, our first select woman. So we have a lot of people that we collectively, work with, Mrs. Tenza included, before we write those letters out and make those letters out. And I thank members of our administration team. We met this morning as well to share that we were pointing in the right direction. And then obviously, tonight getting that number of an 86.1 is quite startling, and, is cause for some concern. I mean, we're sitting here tonight discussing it because we had a concern last week of 74, and tonight we have an 86.1. So, I'm open to a conversation, to a discussion with the board, and obviously Becky is here as well as our head nurse. I know that, Mr. Freund was kind enough to share data with me as well. When he saw the number this evening, he reached out to me to share that number and to share some statistics as well with me. So and I appreciate that. We're all in this together, and that's why I referenced that. Mrs. Tenza, myself, we've been talking. Obviously, Mr. Stramello and I spoke with, the director of Naugatuck Valley Health District. So those are the facts. That's where we are this evening as of, January 21st. I also got a chance to speak with Tom Amy, our emergency management director. He's concerned about the 86.1. He understands that, our in-house numbers are good, which is kudos to us. We could kind of check those two boxes, but that third box, not seeing a decrease, which is really concerning considering we thought we would see a decrease. We have not seen that. Before I open it up, or if anyone has questions of me or anyone, I just want to say that obviously, as this board knows, the health and safety of all students and staff, has been paramount in our decision-making, will continue to be paramount in the decision-making. I know that you take health and safety very seriously. And I don't want that to go unnoticed or unsaid. So I know that, people are passionate. And as I am quoted in the newspaper article, no one wants to be back in school more than myself or any member of my team. However, as we've said from day one, we have to be able to do that in a health and safety matter, that we can do that, to ensure the students and staff safety. So with that, I'll gladly take any questions, or if we want to hear from our head nurse, or if we want to just kind of have an open forum conversation. I don't know what your pleasure is, Mr. Stramello, but that's kind of all of the bullets that I had to share to bring us up to date to where we are this evening.
Right. I think the only thing I would share, though, is that when I spoke to Jessica, I was impressed of how they take into consideration, because we've been hearing comments and about neighboring towns and all that stuff there. And she says that the Valley Health considers each town, and in some cases, each school and each town separately before they make recommendations to the superintendent. So to me, that I thought that was a very thorough a way of doing that. Okay. With that said, Mr. Hatfield, before Mrs. Bruno, Mr. Hatfield, would you like to add anything? Because we've had discussions before we begin.
Just a quick statement for Mr. Wilson referenced the newspaper there. I did just want to clarify, Mr. Champagne, thanks for his help. He did email the newspaper to clarify our dates there. It wasn't necessarily in the Voices, the article that came out today was not necessarily true. But I have no further comment right at this point. I want to let other people talk and I'll follow up.
Okay. I saw Mrs. Bruno's hand first, then I see Mrs. Harmling second.
So I have a question, but I don't know if it's premature to ask a question because I've not heard a recommendation. I've not heard a recommended decision for the board to think about. And we have parents that need an answer for Monday. My question is, from what Mr. Stramello, you said in your conversation with the Naugatuck Valley Health District, if they're considering at the town and school level, would it make sense for the the Seymour Public Schools to think? It took me years to stop saying Seymour and now I mixed it up. But for the Seymour Public Schools to think about at a school level reopening based on that data versus making a decision for the entire district?
Very good question. I don't know the answer to that, but that's a very good question. Okay,
So I
Ms.
can
Ms.
I can,
Harmley. Okay, go ahead, Mr. Wilson. You want to answer that?
oh
And
yeah,
then Ms.
absolutely.
Harmley.
Yeah. Well, just like unfortunately when we had to make that decision to just close Bungie School down originally before closing the entire district, we do look at that based on a school by school basis in terms of staffing needs and others. So we'll continue to do that. That's not gone or foregone. The issues to continue our closure, as we said, from a district perspective of the 18 and the increased number on the state data metric was the concern and the factor to not move towards opening this week and to continue on remote for those 4 days. So the school by school basis has always and will always be what we look at. We don't want to just close a district, for example, because we can't staff CLS, using that as an example. We would close CLS and make CLS remote and keep the other buildings open.
Okay, Mrs. Bruno?
I no.
Okay, go ahead.
I don't think that answered it.
Okay, didn't answer what, Mrs. Bruno?
Whether or not a school by school decision was considered for last week or moving forward into next week.
Okay, Michael?
It was considered last week. We weren't able to open individual schools last week based on our numbers of the 18 and the 74.
Okay, Ms. Harmley.
So two things. Mr. Wilson, I think it is so critically important to not say numbers like the 18 and internal numbers and going from 18 to 9 and numbers like the 74. People don't know what those numbers are referencing. So I just think it's so important to be very clear what you mean when you say an in-house number. And when we're talking about the number of new cases adjusted for population, that's the 74 out of 100,000 or the 86 now this week out of 100,000. So I just think it's critical to make sure everybody understands what the numbers are that you're citing are. So maybe as we continue on with the conversation, we can be aware of that. I wanted to build off what Mr. Stramello said. Ed, I am so happy that you were on that call today because it's the first time that anyone from the board has been in the call. But at the same time, I'm actually very disheartened by what gave you encouragement. So to hear that our Naugatuck Valley Health Department was saying that they look at the numbers town by town actually flies in the direct instruction from the state of Connecticut to not look town by town because the population in Connecticut, and then when you further cut it by town, is so small, it leads us to have very volatile numbers. So the smaller the sample size, the more you expect to see numbers go up and down. If we had the same population of Newtown, for example, that would mean we would be something like Seymour, Ansonia, Derby, maybe even part of Oxford, right? And then we would put all those towns together. We'd have a lot more people in town and the number would be stabilized. It wouldn't be jumping up and down because we have a larger population. So, I mean, I'm looking right now at the Connecticut plan, and it specifically says that because the size of Connecticut's population is relatively small in comparison to many other states, infections and disease rates can become extremely unstable as statewide statistics are analyzed by smaller geographic areas. As such, analyzing any suggesting leading or secondary indicators at the individual or school district level in our state may result in rates that are too unstable to be of use in any continuous decision-making. And I want to just quickly build on that and say, so not only are they telling us specifically and directly not to use individual town numbers, but also the whole dynamic of using that out of 100,000 number and the color coding of red, yellow to green that came from Harvard, and Harvard has completely walked back that whole system. And that was shared, just recently. Harvard came out and said, we now know so much more about what in-school transmission looks like and what this disease looks like. If they knew then what they know now, they never would have put those numbers and put that color coding system in place. And that's their words, not my words. So I'm looking for stability for our families and our district. And we cannot continue through the school year reacting on a Thursday afternoon and Thursday evening basis as to what we're going to do the next week in school. And in terms of the number of quarantine, Really, we have to look at the number of teachers who are quarantined at each building. The students can learn from home if they're on quarantine. It's only when we don't have enough teachers and staff to staff our buildings safely that we should be. So I don't even think we should talk about the number of students quarantined in the context of reopening schools. Obviously, it matters how many students we have in quarantine, but not to fuel the decision on whether to open school, because those students can still learn remotely.
Anyone else? Yes, Mr. Champagne.
Thanks. So what do our staffing numbers look like now as far as teachers not able to return to work?
Okay, Michael? You're
Becky?
We currently have 9 STEM staff members in our district on quarantine.
okay, Mr. Champagne?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if last week we made the decision to postpone for a few days at that 75, you know, I think a decision probably needs to come out tonight, whatever that may be. Being that we're higher this week than we were last week, and that was one of the key driving factors. What, you know, I'm just curious what our plan is and going into Friday, because I without a doubt understand that parents were upset hearing a decision being made on Friday. You know, so I hope whatever happens, we make that decision today and stick to it.
Okay, Jay, then Kristen, Bruno.
Mrs. Bennett, thank you for that number of 9. Just a quick clarification, so to speak. I know last week when we were discussing this and Mr. Wilson and I were speaking and the board members, in the 24-hour period from the time that we made the decision on Thursday night, so to speak, or that we were in consultation to probably 10 a.m. on Friday, can you, and again, I guess that's what I want everybody else to kind of see that picture is what have you been seeing as the trend? I know we see 9 now, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot to make a prediction, but it seems that every time we go in this direction, we then have a larger spike the next day. But I could be wrong. Just help me.
No, you're right. And to be honest with you, the one thing I've learned from this, Jay, is that I would never make a prediction on this. That's one thing that I've learned. Sure. Last week, we had seen a lot more positive cases in students and staff prior to Thursday. We were monitoring them. So we were at that 18 of positive cases that had come in. And then when we got our report of the state level, there's a lot that goes into it. Of course, you know, we reach out to the health district and not just Jess Christie, who's our director. Also, every Tuesday, we sit in on a conference call with the state, the entire state, Governor Lamont, commissioners, and they report to us how to read this data, when we should be concerned, and how to evaluate and move forward, and that we are supposed to defer to our local health department. So we defer to our local health department. We talked to Tommy Amy. And part of the reason why we waited till Friday morning last week was our district doctor wasn't able to call and discuss it with me until Friday morning. He was unavailable. So that was part of the delay in our decision making, is hearing from everybody how they weigh in and looking at it as a whole picture, and not just 18 positive students, 64 students, staff in quarantine, or a state level of 74. I mean, there was a lot of discussion that goes into it, and we do look at the data and multiple facts and take all that into consideration.
Okay, Mrs. Bruno was next.
I just wanted,
Unless Mr. Champagne, you want to follow up with Mrs. Bennett first?
I'm good for now.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Bruno.
I just want to address the comment that parents were upset. And, you know, I read every single letter that came through, and I read the heartbreaking stories. And this is not parents that are upset. These are families and children that are suffering. And I think I hear Mr. Wilson when you say that the health and safety of students is the top priority, but we have to expand our thinking about health and safety beyond COVID. And expert after expert, the American Academy of Pediatrics, experts in both the medical field and in child development have talked about that schools need to open for the health and safety of kids. I shared with all of you a study I received today from the Brown School of Public Health. And on the very first page, it says we can now recommend that schools be open, even at the very high levels of spread we are now seeing, provided that they strictly implement strategies of infection control. So I think we need to check in on the numbers, but what we can control are those strategies of infection control. And we have not talked about those in a very long time. I asked last week if everything was in place, and I was told, yes, it was. That's what we can control, and that's what we can plan around, and that's what we need to do.
Ms. Harmling.
I just want to echo Kristen Bruno's sentiments 100%. I think given the quote that she just read from Brown School of Public Health and international studies and other academic studies and the APA and on, it's time to go back to school and press forward and mitigate within our schools. We cannot live and die by these numbers that go up and down. We just can't. And I apologize. It was a very, very poorly chosen phrase. So I'd like to walk that back, please. But we can't, families cannot exist week to week, not knowing if their children are going to be in school. It is financially harmful. It is emotionally harmful for parents and for students. The excitement that was built up among students last week, to have it then taken away is just too much. We're doing our jobs in schools. We are. And we have to press forward and give kids the education and the social and emotional support that they deserve from our schools.
Anyone else wishing to comment? Mr. Champagne.
Just out of curiosity, those 22, 26 other districts, do we know what they're doing? The ones that are close to the numbers we have?
So when the numbers got released this evening, Mr. Champagne, I was on a series of phone calls, obviously with different people after speaking with NVHD, then with Mr. Amy, and then with a couple other folks. So I did some minimal research, and it is over the map. Some are in hybrid and will remain hybrid. As they said, they're not looking at extending their populations beyond hybrid until those numbers come down. Some are still remote and some are bouncing back and forth. So there's no real consistent. I would say that a lot of them, if I had to be, just from a collective qualitative standpoint, they are on hybrid and plan to stay that way until those numbers get low.
And as far as going back to Mrs. Bruno's point, what are we doing to increase, our protection of the students and staff? Because, if we left in November and we had a plan in place, what increases in protection or equipment and whatnot have we decided to put in place?
Well, I would say that, we would be and Mrs. Bruno alluded to the fact that I did say that we are in a good spot to return in terms of hybrid. And I believe that it's when you increase the capacity more than, and I'm not talking about hybrid with a return for some of our extra learners. I'm talking about increasing the capacity to a fuller classroom. Then it puts our mitigation strategies stretched beyond thin because we're losing the ability to social distance. So in terms of returning to hybrid with increased population, as was discussed in the extended phased reopening plan, we feel comfortable that we can do that and that we were able to stay in, I don't want to say as long as we were in when other districts were going out because of our strategies, because we ultimately were out as well because of the numbers. But I think those mitigation strategies are still solid and remain solid, and coming back in hybrid would be able to continue with that. The issue becomes trying to further increase that population. And that's the very, very cautionary tale, is increasing the population more than, as I said, in that first phase of increased population, as the board was informed of. So it's those next steps, and those next steps, in order to do those, I think that we would need to see how it goes in terms of hybrid, monitor our numbers carefully as we do all the time, and then continue to evaluate and see who we can bring back, as opposed to saying, okay, we'll come back and then next week we're coming back in full. That would not be the prudent decision. Would be a wait, to come back for at least 3 weeks, see how things go with the hybrid population, knowing that we'll go with a 3-2 split, in terms of increasing the number of days. So we have more days in school, and then reevaluating where we are to get more students in our building, I think would be the course of action. I hope that answers your question, Mr. Champagne.
Mr. Champagne?
Yeah, it does.
Okay, Ms. Harmling?
Thank you. I'd like to build, Mr. Wilson, on what you were saying, because when we met on January 11th, what you said was exactly what I was articulating, in terms of, I wasn't in favor of the board making a motion saying that, we'll go back to hybrid, but we'll push out one factor, we'll push out this factor, we'll push out, high school coming back full time. Those are the things that I do agree. We've got to get back to school in the hybrid plus mode, right? Where we've got the additional students coming back in, but nothing close to full capacity. Let's get that under our belt. And then we reassess. You reassess. How it's going in the buildings. The administrators know how it's going in the buildings. And I understand that the numbers surprised people on Thursday, but that is what threw me so horribly for a loop on Friday with so many other parents, because I thought we were all on the same page in terms of, we feel good about our mitigating strategies when we're in this hybrid mode, even if it's hybrid plus some extra learners. I thought we were all feeling good about our mitigation strategies. And so I hear you saying we do feel good about that. We don't want to lock the district into any plan on a 1 week, 2 week. The extended plan that Mrs. Tenzin administration put together, it is great for a plan. But I recognize for myself that, if teachers are uncomfortable, if parents are uncomfortable, if students are uncomfortable with the amount of social distancing we're doing with hybrid plus, and we're not ready to go to full, then that's a choice we have to make. But we've got to press forward with the first phase of the extended plan. We just have to. We have to. And so, do I hear you saying, Mr. Wilson, that we are going to go to school on Monday with the hybrid plus plan? And when I say hybrid plus, what I mean is the hybrid original AB cohorts plus the students who were invited back for the 4-day week. Are we going to start that on Monday?
So we talked about it. I talked about it with the chair, the vice chair as well prior to this meeting. And we wanted to hear, in terms of the discussionary piece, to hear the board's concerns and comments. We are right now, as I shared and as we shared in a conversation, having our numbers go down in terms of our own numbers, being able to open the doors in terms of having the appropriate staffing, and that our numbers are going down in terms of the numbers that we see in quarantine. We check 2 out of the 3 boxes. The third box that we don't check, unfortunately, is that state data metric. So while it's a tough decision to make, and it is one that, as I said, we can definitely make that decision prior to closure of this meeting this evening. But I wanted to hear from all board members, and hear their concerns and answer their concerns, and then share exactly where we were in the process. And I know I heard from most board members, but I wanted to share that that's the process that we've been going through. So to hear from anyone else, or if not, we could share exactly what the next steps would be.
Okay, what's other board members who have not spoken?
Mr. Chairman, Jim Garofalo.
Go ahead.
Here's my statement. Bring them back on Monday.
Okay, bring them back how, Mr. Garofalo?
As the plan has been laid originally, to bring them back prior to the increased delay of 4 days.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Stanek or Mrs. Mysteriak? Any comment?
This is Beth Mysteriak. I think based on, the information we've heard tonight, and the fact that we know students are suffering, we need to push forward. This isn't easy for anyone. It's a very difficult decision for parents, students, administrators, everyone involved, but we need to push forward. So I agree with Jim's statement. Let's move forward with our plan and continually assess. I think, again, data is important, but data can be used in a lot of different ways. So I think Ms. Harmley had a good point about clarity when we talk about numbers and, monitoring that. Maybe perhaps we need to think about how we do that a little better and with more transparency so that no one's surprised by any of the next moves we make. So those are my comments.
Mr. Stanek?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Fred Stanek. I know this has been a very difficult time for administrators of our school district to manage the needs of the students and the community. And it's a balance, obviously, a balance between protecting health and safety from a physical or scientific perspective and the educational needs, including the emotional and social needs of the children. It's a balance. But I think after listening to what we're talking about tonight and the discussion, I think the balance, the scale weighs slightly in favor of returning to the hybrid plan, the reopening plan, and let's go back on Monday.
Okay, Mr. Kubik.
I do want to say one other thing.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Contrary to the statements of some people that I've heard, I firmly believe that our administration and staff have worked diligently to protect our community and to advocate and to educate for our children. I support the decision to return to the hybrid plan, and we must remain careful and protect the health and safety of everyone, indeed our lives, everyone's lives. But I do want to say that I think the administration has been very diligent and worked hard to protect everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Stanek. Mr. Kubik. Peter, are you still there?
Yeah, yep, I'm here. I'm
Okay,
just,
go ahead.
trying to get the mute button off.
Okay, go ahead. It looks like it's off to me, Pete. Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. Hang on a second. Yes.
Now you muted yourself again, Peter.
Yeah, I don't know why it's clicking. I don't know. I didn't touch it that time.
Uh-oh.
Well, so, all right, what's the question here?
Excuse me?
What is the question here?
Well, we've been discussing whether we're returning to school in the hybrid method on Monday.
Right. So my position on that is that as much as we want to see the kids get back to school, and I really would like to, because we know socially, emotionally, physically, it all makes sense to get back to school, that at least this is a step in that direction. It's not good that we're hearing some numbers that are up and down, but I think we're going to be on this roller coaster for a bit of a while. So I think it's worth giving it a shot and see where it goes, with the understanding that things could change from week to week, unfortunately.
Okay, so I believe I've heard from all of the board members. Mr. Wilson, you've heard from the board members. So obviously you're going to be prepared, correct? Oh, Mrs. Bruno, I'm sorry.
I just want to make one more point, and you've talked about making decisions collaboratively and seeking input from a number of people. I just have to reiterate that the two groups that need to be part of the ongoing evaluation and conversation are our teachers and our community members, our parents. And they need to have a voice in this process because they have a responsibility, because it's the things that they do outside of school that are going to help control the numbers. So I think I just want to remind, and that's spoken to in the article, that mutual trust and mutual collaboration is something we have to continue to strive for in making decisions and evaluating what we're doing in the future.
All right. Yes, Ms. Harmling.
I'll make it really quick. I just wanted to build on what Pete said. I'm syncing with the sentiment, but I just get a little bit nervous to leave it hanging there that it will be week to week. And I would really love, more of an. I don't doubt that the administration wants to be back in school. I hear that. I believe that, but I'm still quite nervous that we're going to be doing a week to week thing, and our community needs to be prepared. So to the extent that we have numbers and we know, just be clear and transparent. If Bungie has to close because there's not enough teachers, just say that and give parents some kind of foreshadowing, just a little heads up, we're watching numbers. And I just really want to move away from focusing so much as having our one single town number as that third metric. Mr. Wilson, you mentioned number of positive cases in district, number of quarantine staff in district. I'm very much opposed to having that third key metric be our little town of Seymour numbers. At a minimum, average the valley together, because there's no bubble that's put over Seymour. We're all interchanging and doing our shopping in all of our local towns and what have you. So the state has told us we should not look at our town number. And when we started on this journey together, we were told as a board that we were not going to look at the Seymour town number because the state was saying, look at community numbers. At that time, the community number, quote unquote community, was the entire county of New Haven. So I don't know where along the line that shifted, but since that is our most volatile number, or could be, I want to hear a little bit assurance that that's not going to be a litmus test number, because it feels like it has been.
So what I can share to answer that question is, as I said, that's why we're looking at all the numbers, and I appreciate you understanding that we're looking at our in-house numbers. The third number that you're referring to is the state metric, as NVHD has also shared, and even this evening on the call with Mr. Stramello, we have to be aware of that, because that's within our community, and that shows that the rate is spreading, and that's why that number is looked at. So that's not ever going to be the deciding factor per se, but that number has to be included in that decision making, especially when we look forward to continually pushing our metrics to see if we can, obviously, when we can return to fuller capacities. So understanding what you're saying, we're not going to use only one single metric, nor have we. We're going to use all three. But, throughout this process, we've always been encouraged to look to guidance from our local health department, which we have done. And, as I said, that's why that number is important, because they reference that number as well.
Can you just help me understand why there is a disconnect between what has been published and reinforced from the state and what our local Valley Health District is telling us? Because I read directly from the state plan that says, do not use your single town number. So just help me understand what the disconnect is.
I don't believe there is a disconnect. We're not using that single number. We're using all the metrics, but that number is included in there as well, is what I'm saying.
Listen, it says not to use that number for your town. That's not talking about the in-house numbers. It clearly says the number of new cases adjusted for population, do not use that at the individual town or school district level. And when we started this journey together, as I mentioned, the administrative team said that, no, we don't look at our school district number. We look at the community number. And at that time, the community number, we were told, was defined as the county. So I'm just simply asking to help me understand when that changed and why the state didn't update their guidance, if in fact, Valley Health District knows something different than what we see clearly printed by the state.
I can't answer to the specificity. All I can share is that in conversations with NVHD, that number is referenced, and that's the number that we look at, and that's also the number that our town emergency management director looks at. As I said, that is not our only one that we look at. So, we're not going to be a knee-jerk reaction per se next Thursday when that number comes out. we would like to come back hybrid and to stay hybrid as long as we can, provided our numbers, those two factors that we referenced earlier, which are trending in the right direction, stay in the right direction. So I can't answer as to whether or not we're using that number or not using that number. All I could share with you is that is the data metric that does get discussed by those two individuals. And, I know when Becky speaks to NVHD as well, and to Lisa Troop, the head nurse there, the nurse at NVHD, and she could definitely elaborate more on that, but those are the numbers that get shared. So Becky, if you want to add anything that I may have missed, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, I was gonna, go ahead, Becky, I was gonna call on you.
Thank you, Mr. Chamello. So every Tuesday, we do a DPH call with the state. As I said, Governor Lamont, the commissioners, and what they refer to with our state level, that's our town level, that's really important to notice is transmission. What they say is that it's the transmission rate of how fast and the positive tests that are coming back in that town. So no, it's not a key indicator by itself, but it does allude to, and this is the town themselves, the state themselves reporting this to us in our meeting every Tuesday morning, that it gives you an idea of what's happening in the surroundings around you, so that the schools, this transmission may occur outside the schools, but then it can cause an exposure with the higher numbers in the school, is how they tell us to look at those numbers. Which is, like I said, the one thing we're more worried about is exposures than necessarily transmission in school, because we do have good mitigating factors. We worry about the times, like we said, with bringing a full in return and the students having their masks off to eat. Those are the times we worry about. We know that when we have our masks on, there's definitely reduced transmission. And if we could do that all the time, I think we would already have all of our students back in school, if we can have students leave masks on for the full day. But we know that's not an option. Especially in the elementary schools, we need to remove their masks to eat 3 times a day in the 7 hours they're there. So these are the things that we need to take into consideration as a whole. And like I said, the state refers to us to keep that as one of the factors, and it is indicative of the transmission going on in the community around us, especially in our town.
Okay. All right. I think that we, Chris, is that your hand up, Chris Champagne?
Yeah, it's me.
Okay.
So yeah, I'm big on the numbers, and I think Mr. Wilson's gonna give us his parting shots here. But when I'm definitely in the minority on this one. But when I look at the letter that was sent out last week, and I guess in Mr. Wilson's final chat here, I'm just curious what's changed. The numbers are higher, but everything else has kind of stayed the same. So I'm just looking to see what decision is put forth in front of us, and we'll go from there.
So the things that have changed, Mr. Champagne, and leading up to getting that final metric number this evening, the things that have changed, that we were, as opposed to 18 confirmed cases, we were down to 8, which was trending in the right direction. Our numbers of mandatory quarantine were going down and continually declining. Tomorrow, there'll be more off of that list. Obviously, we don't know if we get any confirmed cases tomorrow, as Mr. Hatfield alluded to, but we are trending in the right direction in 2 out of those 3 categories. That third category being that metric from the state tracker. So, that's really where we're at. So, with the decision to come back hybrid, checking off 2 out of the 3 boxes and closely monitoring it would be because of those factors being in our favor.
Okay. All right, Mr. Champagne.
Through the chair.
So we're just looking at, constantly reevaluating the situation, and unfortunately, it has to be something that goes on a week by week basis. There isn't much more that we can do with that, correct?
Correct. Unfortunately, it changes daily, Mr. Champagne, and no one's more frustrated than myself when that happens. Just like, when you're, and I hate to keep using the Bungie school example, because I hate using that example, because when that decision came over the weekend, when we got flooded with the number of staff that were going to be out, and then others that had to quarantine, and we made that difficult decision to close. Those decisions can happen at any moment. As Mr. Hatfield alluded to, we can get calls tomorrow that we have 37 teachers at CLS, and I don't want that. Trust me, no one wants that. We don't wish that on anybody. It's a terrible, terrible disease. But, to say hey, we're going to, go hybrid and it's going to clear everything and everything will be fine. Well, that's all well and good, but if the numbers dictate that we have to close a building because we cannot staff it, then that is the case, and that could change not only weekly, but unfortunately daily, Mr. Champagne. So I would never put a time frame on it. I would say that, to alleviate some people's maybe concern or what they, are looking for is going back to the hybrid model is going to be the direction, and continually looking at our data to see when and if we can potentially bring in an increased population would be a fair statement, but still realizing, and to use Mr. Hatfield's point, that things change and data changes, and there are going to be decisions based once we receive that data that could cause individual closures or something of that nature. So I hope that answers your question, but I think that tries to clear it up rather than say, hey, we're going to keep open. Well, if we have 40 teachers out there, it's impossible to keep a building open with that, So we will say that to Ms. Harmling's point. We would come on and just say, hey, due to staffing, we had to close X, Y, or Z. But going to a hybrid approach and continually looking at that and monitoring that to see where we are before we increase numbers would be the way to go.
Okay, Mr. Champagne?
Yep, that's good. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Hatfield?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize. I got cut off for a second. So if I repeat myself or something somebody else said, I apologize. But I thank you for all the statements. Again, I think, again, as we have this conversation, I'm leaning towards more of the hybrid approach. But I want people who may be listening or other board members to continue to understand the fluidity of this. And it is a challenge. Again, last week I shared, or last time we met, a little bit of my personal story, how I have been struggling with this. Excuse me, today I walked into school and there were numerous names called on the intercom. Somebody yesterday was considered to be positive, and we now had to quarantine 5 individuals who were told, you have to leave, you have to go home, you have to quarantine, and who knows what's going to bring tomorrow. But that's 5 less teachers we have in one building. So again, when we talk about the idea that it is week to week, there's not much else we could say because again, the health and safety is important and is paramount. We just last week when I was dealing with the situation with the first, superintendent, I believe it was 10 cases in, I want to say a 2-hour period that we were informed of. So we are leaning towards reopening, but tomorrow the data could not support that idea. And I want to caution people about that because I understand people want to get back to school, but we have to, if we don't have the staff in place, we don't have any other options. Excuse me. The other thing is I appreciate, we've had a lot of letters and a lot of people that have commented about this, but I really want to emphasize the fact that some of this does bear on the bigger government above ourselves. I know, and I don't like to wear my teacher union hat in this, but I know the unions have supported the idea that we need better metrics. And to Mrs. Harmling's point, and people have talked about the metrics, but we are using the best metrics we can in our district, in our town. The state of Connecticut has refused to put that to paper or to put that statement into action as to what metrics people should use into closing schools. And I will say this, my own personal opinion, I blame the state for that failure. We have done the best. Our administrative team and Mrs. Bennett have done a tremendous job working with the metrics that they have been given. For those people who wrote our emails or emailed us, and I appreciate them and I feel for you, but please, I also urge you to write the legislature, the governor, and to support the idea that the overall metrics, or there should be some sort of state plan, write the new commissioner and give them your feedback as well. I appreciate it, but it's difficult for us with the cards that we're dealt and the information we have. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, I think that we've discussed this enough. I think that there's the feeling that Mr. Wilson will be notifying everyone that we will be returning to hybrid plus on Monday.
I'm sorry, Mr. Stramel, I'm not ready to move on. Mrs. Bruno has something to say, and I'd like to follow on as well.
Okay, well, okay, I thought you had your hand up first.
No, Mrs. Bruno is, I'm more than happy for her to speak.
All right, go ahead.
I just had a question. It's a procedural question about quarantine, because I know since we went out, there had been some guidance about being able to adjust the amount of time of quarantine. And quarantine is a mitigating factor, right? Being able to contact trace and to have people quarantined to prevent transmission. Are we working as a district on a 14-day quarantine? Are we working on the 10-day with symptoms checks from days 10 to 14? Are we working on the 7? What was the decision-making around that?
Mrs. Bennett, would you like to respond to that?
Sure. So we also meet Wednesday mornings with all the Valley supers and the nurse supervisors, and we did discuss this collaboratively. And we decided, along with the other towns in the Valley, that we are still going with the 14-day. The state had put in effect guidance that if we let them back after 10 days, they couldn't do gym, they couldn't participate in certain things, that we thought it would be harder to exclude kids from that and have them outshine of why we're having them sit or other reasons. So we decided for safety reasons and to minimize exposure in school and transmission, we're going to stick with the 14-day quarantine for exposure. If you're positive for COVID, that obviously changes to the 10 days. And we did post that, our policy and protocols, on our district webpage, to be clear.
Okay, Ms. Harmling?
Question, I'm sorry. Oh,
Go ahead, Beth. I defer to Beth.
just a question to the Nurse Bennett. Is there an opportunity for a negative test after 3 to 5 days of potential exposure that would release you from the quarantine?
So you can't test out of, if for exposure, you can't test out of quarantine. And if you're positive, you have to write out the time. So there are places
for different, because I have a child in a daycare setting and they were testing out of quarantine if you were tested 3 to 5 days after exposure. Is it different for the school system?
It is different because in the school system, you're able to mandate and follow the guidance per your health department. But in that small setting for a daycare, they can change their rules, their guidance, because they're a private sector. So, but our guidance in the guidance of the like I said, the policies and protocols that we've accepted per the Valley have been not testing out of quarantine. And that's what we've been advised per the state.
That's interesting because the guidance I got, I was told came from Naugatuck Valley Health District. So I'm just.
That is interesting. And I will follow up on that. I will ask myself just to get clearance for us all.
Yeah, it was very clear guidance, and I was told it came from the health department. So if you could follow up on that, that'd be great.
I definitely will. And I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Harmling?
Thank you. And also on the new addendum 5 that was updated on January 7th, they actually do reference testing out and having to be 7-day quarantine with a negative test. But the big caveat is, as Mrs. Bennett said, they then say through day 14, the student can't do sports, can't do gym, has to be vigilant with masking and social distancing. And the social distancing part is the problem for the students. So 2 quick questions. Is it possible that we would consider allowing teachers back earlier, since it is definitely more likely that the teacher can maintain the 6-foot social distance? And obviously we don't have to worry about the teacher doing extracurricular sports, and that might help with us. So I'm just wondering if we thought about or could think about moving forward, maybe using one of the less stringent quarantine criteria only for staff and teachers who feel confident that they can maintain social distancing. My second question is built on that same topic of staff having to quarantine. One of the things that has been talked about at the state level, and I don't know what, if anything, we've done here in Seymour, is just trying to be super creative. We all know the situation with substitutes, but what have we done to make sure our community knows, honestly, how easy it is to be a substitute now, given the state loosened the guidance? And have we considered allowing teachers who are on quarantine to teach remotely while their children are in school and remote, with obviously an adult in the classroom? Because that would really go a long way to not having to close down schools when we have a large number of staff or medium-sized number of staff in quarantine. If they can instruct remotely from home, just like they've been doing for 2.5 months, as long as we have an able-bodied, qualified, per the new state guidance, adult in the room with the students.
Okay, Michael, you want to answer those questions? I'll come to you, Chris.
Mrs. Tenza was about to answer that, I believe.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
That's okay. Through the chair, Mrs. Tenza, we are being very creative with how teachers are working. And if they are on quarantine, if they feel well enough to teach, we permit them to teach. And sometimes that changes. After a few days, they start to feel poorly and then they cannot teach. But if they are able to teach from home under quarantine, we are permitting that. And so far it's been remote, but when they're in, if there are students in the building, we would work very hard to find another staff member to be in the classroom, supervising the children that are in the classroom, but allowing the teacher to teach.
That's great.
Okay, Mr. Champagne.
Yeah, just a question here, and as far as that type of scenario, and I think about going back to hybrid, and we have a teacher who might test positive, let's say on a Wednesday. So the cohort B for that teacher wouldn't be affected, but the teacher now goes home. Am I incorrect in saying that I thought my understanding was that a certified teacher has to be in the room with the children? It couldn't be just like a paraprofessional?
For what, Chris?
If
how long?
if the cohort A and B were split and the teacher was now teaching from home, feeling okay, have to be quarantined or whatnot. So that teacher's home, but now half of that class is in the building. I thought we needed to have a certified teacher in that room, and it couldn't just be any adult.
Mrs. Tenza?
So whenever possible, this is Mrs. Tenza, whenever possible, and we've only had to do this a few times so far, we try to find a substitute who has, it's not a certified teacher. A substitute does not necessarily have a teaching certification. A substitute could have a 4-year degree or anything else. So we're trying very hard to make sure that it's a substitute. But if we had to, it might be a tutor. It might be, it might be a paraprofessional. We're really trying very hard to use the flexibility that the state has offered, because the instruction has to come from the certified teacher.
Okay, Chris?
Okay, that makes sense.
Okay. So I believe we're ready to move on. Okay, and Mr. Wilson, you're going to take care of the procedure to notify people, correct?
Yes, Mr. Schmello, after this meeting, I will draft the letter and I will get it out to all via Blackboard Connect as all of our communications go out. And it will also be available on our communications page on our COVID website.
Okay.
We may skip the email to the board since you guys are already aware of the decision, but if you guys want me to clutter your email box, we definitely can do that.
Please don't.
Please don't? Is that what Mr.
Yeah.
I'll send you two, Mr. Garofolo. Thank you.
Okay.
What did I just say?
That's it. All right. So we're now on to public comment. Mr. Champagne, do you want to report what you have found?
Right. So in talking with the chair and vice chair today, we over the past week and a half or so received a pretty unprecedented amount of emails. I know that we had sort of received some guidance from the board council on how to proceed. I believe right now the count of the emails received was around 40. I'm just checking because there was a couple more that came in since the meeting started. I believe we're at 43 or 44 right now. So, and they're, majority of them are fairly lengthy. So I had sent the counts of everybody's name and their position on the majority of them were dealing with the return to school. So I'd sent that spreadsheet to both Jay and Ed. And I think it clearly identifies what the majority of the folks are saying. Out of the 35 at the time, this was 4:30 this afternoon, 33 of them were dealing with the reopening plan. 2 of the comments were in support of keeping things the way they are with full remote. 2 were hybrid, 10 were full-time, and then 19 they didn't specify what type of return, whether it be hybrid or full-time, but they did indicate that they were expressing their opinion for some sort of return. So I believe everybody received the emails. They're more or less directed at us. We could forward them to everybody. And I know Leanne is on here. I apologize. I didn't get a moment to send those all to you, but we will certainly forward those over and so that they can be filed for everybody to be registered with the town clerk.
Okay. Yes, Ms. Harmling.
Could you please also make reference to the letter that was sent in that was signed by over 100 parents? And that is, some of those numbers will be repetitive because some parents sent in their own public comment. But I think it's important to note that letter came in as well. And just to clarify, are we saying we're not going to read any of those letters out loud, but that they will all be reflected in the minutes?
Mr. Champagne?
Whatever the decision is, like I said, the majority of the emails were to express opinions to get back into school. We're doing that. I mean, we could file them and everybody could read them, and anybody in the public will be able to view them as well.
Mr. Chairman, Jim Garofalo, I have a question for Chris.
Yes.
If I recall correctly, there was one letter that I read in which the author asked to have certain information not made public. I'm not familiar enough with how that has to be treated, but there was a concern on that person's part regarding certain information that was being shared with the board, but did not want shared publicly. How do we handle that?
So I believe that in order for any public comment to be read, or if we were live, somebody would get up and speak. I'm sorry, my house phone's ringing. The person then emailed me directly after and said that they chose to not be anonymous, so that will be included.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions?
Just for clarification through the chair, that email that was sent by 180 members or 180 parents on behalf of 231 children, technically, I believe is not necessarily public comment because it was not, and I could be wrong, but was not specifically stated to be read at the board meeting. It was just considered to be an email. From our attorney's perspective, but I will defer to Mr. Champagne to clarify.
If I could, I think that's totally fine because I agree. I don't know if it was intended for public comment. We have spoken about it now in the public domain that we recognize it. So I think that's really what was important.
Okay.
So, I'm sorry, and I was just clarifying in the sense I wasn't sure if the question by Ms. Harmling was to include all 180 members in the names in the minutes. That's why I was clarifying.
Right, and I'm saying I'm not going to argue to have them included because I understand that position that they were not in the proper public comment format. We've talked about it here, and that to me is enough. It's now in the public domain that 180 parents wrote in. So
sure. No, I appreciate it through the chair. I just wanted to clarify. I wasn't sure what your expectation was, so I just wanted to make sure we were all on the same page. Thank you.
All good.
Okay. All right. Yes, Mrs. Bennett.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to clarify. I got the answer to Beth's question before. I was hoping I would get the answer prior to us ending so I could address the board. And I did reach out to Jess Christie the director of our health department. And she said, while the CDC did list that as an option, they're still preferring the 14 days, which the CDC endorses as the gold standard, which is why that's what they're recommending for schools. And it does go along with like what Ms. Harmeling said with the monitoring and, not releasing to sports and activities. However, the private sectors do have the ability to take that 7-day test out option with frequent monitoring of the person who tested positive.
Thanks.
Yes.
Okay, all righty. So I think the chair is ready to hear a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Jim
Mr.
Garofalo.
Garofalo. Who seconds it?
Chris Champagne, I'll second.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Yes, Ms. Harmley.
I was muted. I am going to oppose because I don't think it's right that we haven't read any letters when we read multiple letters with the opposing point of view. So I am objecting to.
The objecting to the adjournment?
I am objecting to the adjournment, yes.
Okay.
I feel those letters should have been read.
Okay. Anybody else that's objecting? Okay, so the motion carries then 9-1 to adjourn.
8-1.
Excuse me, thank you. 8-1. All right, good evening, everyone.
Night, everybody.
Night. Thank you.